Here we are in Marietta, Georgia at the Big Chicken. I could give you my absolute location and coordinates, but that wouldn't help you as much as telling you my relative location, which is next to the Big Chicken. Today, we're going to talk about spatial concepts. I'm Mr. Coulter, and this is Human Geography. Today, we're moving on to topic 1.4 of Unit 1, Spatial Concepts. So we've all taken history classes, and we know that historians look through the lens of time to help us understand our past, to inform us for our future. But geographers look through the lens of space to understand places. They want to look at the humans involved with the changing of the place, why the place is there, and all of these questions. And all of those questions are wrapped up in something called the spatial perspective. That's how geographers look at the world, through the spatial perspective. So we ask ourselves 5 major questions. First is what? What is at a place? Then we look at where, which is the location of a place. We talked about in a previous lesson that there's the absolute location, which is either the coordinates, address, or something that tells us where the exact point on Earth is, or the relative location, which is what's that place's relationship in distance from somewhere else. We want to also get into the why there. What's the situation of the place? And then why do we care about it? Why is it important, the interactions that places have with one another? And then we're going to look today at patterns, which is trying to understand patterns we can see from looking at places to help us better understand our world. So place, the building block of this spatial perspective, is a specific point on Earth, distinguished by one or more particular characteristics. Every place has a unique location or position on Earth's surface. Let's take, for example, Machu Picchu in Peru. It was a city built on top of a mountain by the Incans, and you can see the place is spectacular, one of the most wonderful places in the world to go visit. I would recommend that everybody do that at some point if you can. And when you're there, you see the place as a point on a physical landscape, the mountains, but you also see the world wonder of the city that the Incans built up there and the ruins that are left behind. That makes it a unique place. And so as we get into the details of what a place is referring to the specific human and physical characteristics of a location. And we break that up into 2 ways. We break that up into site and situation. So first, we're going to talk about the site. The site is the characteristics at the immediate location. So if you're looking at the soil type, the climate, what buildings are built there, those all fill into the site. The situation is the location relative to the surroundings. So why is it important that it's there at that point? So place is broken up into site and situation. Let's take the example of the Battery in Atlanta. So the Battery is where Truist Park, used to be called SunTrust Park, but they just changed the name. It's where the Braves play. The Battery is located in Cobb around 285. And when you get there, you can see there's a ballpark, there's some office buildings, there's a hotel, and there's all sorts of shops and restaurants all around the baseball park that give an experience of what is there. So you might go to the site to see the Braves play, and you look around, and those physical characteristics, the things I'm describing that you can see, those are a part of the site. The situation is, why is it located there? Why is it important relative to its surroundings? So if you look on the map, it's at the corner of 285 and 75 in Cobb County. The Braves ballpark used to be downtown, and it was a little bit difficult to reach for a lot of people. So they moved it to this location that's between 2 major highways, and that anybody who is in that north part of Atlanta can hopefully easily reach. So they moved it to be closer to where they thought the fan base was of people who were buying season tickets. And so the situation's important because it's easy to reach from anywhere around Metro Atlanta. So that's the situation of the Battery, where we said the site was the stuff that was physically there. So it's important to understand that site and situation, both are describing place, but one, site, describes the physical characteristics, while the other, situation, describes why is it important that it's there relative to other stuff. Another really important thing for us to understand about place is the sense of place that it gives. Humans tend to perceive the characteristics of places in different ways based on your personal beliefs or experiences. So let's think about Rome, Italy. The Vatican is located in Rome, Italy. The Vatican is the holy site of the Catholic Church. So where people would go to hear the word of the Pope, who's the representative of the Catholic Church, or to see a lot of sacred artifacts from the church. So if you are a Catholic person going to the Vatican for the first time, that is a religious experience. People who are Catholic view that as a coming home of sorts, where they get to be at the center of their religion. And it's an amazing place. And having toured it as a non-Catholic, I was blown away by it. But it's a different experience as someone who is not Catholic than a Catholic person. That's the sense of place the Vatican provides for Catholic people. Same thing if you go to your grandparents' house and you have a really specific sense of the place. You have memories of meals that you had there with family, or fun holidays, or gifts you've received, or times you've shared. That is your sense of place. But if someone else went to your grandparents' house, they would just view it as any other house. So the sense of place is the importance that we put on places. Some places don't inspire a sense of place, and that is known as placelessness. So placelessness is the concept that anywhere you look, it doesn't provide any sense of place. So if you were to go to, let's say like a Target parking lot that has a Home Depot and a Starbucks and a couple other kind of like chain stores in it, I could drop you off at the same looking parking lot in Atlanta, Georgia, or in Phoenix, Arizona, or in Boston, Massachusetts, and you may struggle to figure out where you are because that place inspires no sense of place. All of those look kind of the same. And that phenomenon of going to not having a sense of place is known as placelessness. Now, all places have a toponym, which is the name of the place. Toponyms can provide some insight into the physical geography, the history, or the culture of a location. So first, with physical geography, let's look at the example of Clearwater, Florida. Clearwater, Florida is outside of Tampa on Tampa Bay, and it is a beautiful Clearwater beach. Pretty easy to see where they got the name from for Clearwater. Greenland, on the other hand, is one of the confusing examples because they actually switched their name. There's an interesting story about that with Iceland, and it doesn't look like a Greenland. It's like a frozen tundra where you wouldn't really want to be stuck. And so that's a confusing name. Similarly to like Mount Pleasant in South Carolina, that's just a suburb of Charleston. It's a really nice place, but there's no mountain there. So it doesn't make sense that Mount Pleasant is named that. Sometimes we get an insight into what is there, like Salt Lake City, or what the history of the place was, like Los Angeles or San Diego. A lot of names in California have Spanish influence because it was owned by the Spanish before the United States bought it from the Spanish. So that gives us an insight into the history of the place. Or the culture, if you look at if it's named after someone or something important in a culture, that can give you an insight into why the place is special. So space, as we look at space and place, space is the area we study between two places. To do that, we have to use distance. We talked about absolute distance, which is just exactly how far something is in meters or miles. But there's also relative distance. And that's the proximity indicated in the degree of nearness. So how far does it feel away from something else? You can say in meters, miles, kilometers, time, all of those things. You can say it in a straight line, like as the crow flies, or travel distance. So an example of this would be Milwaukee to Kalamazoo is 130 miles by air. So that's a direct line. But it's 250 miles by car, which seems a lot further. And that's the relative distance of how is it important to you in the way that you would travel to get there and the distance between two places. And those distances affect our spatial interaction, which is the contact, movement, and flow of things between locations. That can be physical flow, like movement of people or shipping of goods, or it can be information through radio, internet. Now we have Zoom and all of these different things. And that increased connection between places is reflected in the growth of our spatial interaction. So we'll look at the example of New York and London in a second and how those two places interact. So the distance between New York and London goes through something called the time-space compression. So time-space compression is the shrinking time distance between two locations because of the improved methods of transportation or communication. So let's use our example of New York and London. So those two are separated by the Atlantic Ocean. They're pretty far apart, but the development of air travel has greatly reduced travel time between those two places, and they feel a lot closer than they did in the 1800s. The result of this around the world is that global forces are influencing culture everywhere, and they're reducing local diversity more than ever before. So there are some negatives of this globalization, but also some positives. So if you live in New York, you might have a company that is based out of London, and you might travel every other week between, flying out on a Monday, coming back on a Friday night, and then still being based in New York. And this reduction in travel time really is what we're talking about with time-space compression. I know students who connect with their parents or grandparents who are in other countries at the time using technology and the internet, and that's this time-space compression. That's something that could not have happened a while ago. The opposite of this, though, is when you have a friction of distance between things being far apart, you become less connected to them. So this inverse relationship that's the opposite of time-space compression is distance decay. Distance decay is where the further you get from something, the less it affects you. So I want you to imagine that we're sitting in class upstairs at Cambridge High School on the 2800 hall, and all of a sudden we hear that there is a protest happening downstairs in the math hallway. I think that would be extremely interesting to you as a student. You'd really want to know. You'd probably even know and text people who are there right then. But if we said that that same protest was happening at Milton High School, it would be less interesting to you than if it was at Cambridge. You still would be connected to it. You may still have friends you can text from middle school or elementary school who are at Milton, but it would be less impactful. If we do the same thing and say that there's a riot happening in San Diego, California at a high school, you would be interested. You'd want to hear about it on the news, but you wouldn't have that kind of connection where you knew people there or could connect with them. And then finally, if you took it and said there was a riot in a high school in South Korea, there's a chance you probably wouldn't even hear about it. Unless it made national news, you wouldn't know that it happened at all. And that's distance decay, that the further away you get from something emotionally, the less connected you are to it. So let's end this on spatial distribution. So looking at patterns. So spatial distribution includes density, which is the amount of something in an area, the concentration, which is the spread of a feature over space, and the pattern, which is how is something arranged. So the first one is density, how much of something there is in an area. Take a second and try to decide, is A more dense or is B more dense? We can see that B is more dense because assuming that's the same space, there are more houses built on that same space. When you look at the concentration, that is how much it's spread out, we can see is A or B more concentrated. B is more concentrated because the houses are built closer together. And then we look at patterns, we can say, is there a pattern in A or B? We can obviously see that A has a pattern, everything is linear in a line, where B seems to be randomly spaced out. So density, concentration, and patterns are all things that we'll examine to try to understand our world. And we can even use patterns to draw conclusions between multiple maps. Like if you look at the topographical map of the United States on the left, you can see where the mountains and where sea level is. And on the right, you can see the tree cover density. So we can see the human settlements, and we see that at higher altitudes, there aren't many trees and people don't establish there as much. But at sea level, there are a lot of people there. So looking at these things help us to understand spatial patterns. We'll continue to look at spatial patterns and all of these concepts as we move forward throughout the class. And this was just one step in our journey to better understanding our world. I'm Mr. Coulter, and that was Human Geography.